The French Quarter didn't sleep, it just changed its sins. By 2 a.m., Bourbon Street had softened to a low, syrupy hum of jazz and spilled bourbon, but the building at the corner of Dgekta and St. Philip stood apart from all of it, 12 stories of reclaimed brick and blackened steel that most people walked past without a second glance. The sign above the loading dock read Meridian Freight Solutions. Nobody asked what they freighted. Petra Ames had stopped asking questions a long time ago. She was good at that, at looking at numbers and not the hands that moved them. She'd been doing it for 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days. She knew the exact count because she'd started the job the same week her brother Felix was diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma, and every morning since then she'd calculated the gap between what treatment cost and what she had. The gap was always winning. It was 1:47 a.m. when she finally admitted she wasn't going home. The quarterly compliance report was due at 8, and 3 of the subledgers didn't reconcile. Not badly, not in a way any outside auditor would catch, but she would catch it, and more importantly, Holt would catch it. She'd learned in her first week that Donovan Holt did not tolerate imprecision, not in his suits, not in his sentences, and certainly not in his numbers. She pulled her cardigan tighter, a worn beige thing she'd owned since college, laundered so many times the cuffs had gone thin, and bent back over the spreadsheet. The overhead lights on the executive floor were on motion sensors. They'd clicked off 20 minutes ago. She was working by the pale wash of her laptop, and the ambient glow of New Orleans bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere below, a trumpet cried and somebody cheered. Up here, there was only the soft percussion of her keystrokes, the hum of the building's ventilation, and the stubborn arithmetic that wouldn't give her what she needed. She found the discrepancy at the end of the 3rd subledger. A wire transfer from a holding company in Belize routed through a pharmaceutical distributor in Tampa, cleaner than anything she'd touched before, which meant someone had worked very hard to make it look that way. Someone other than Holt had made this transaction. She sat up. Her spine protested, that deep, grinding complaint of a body that had been folded into the same chair for 6 hours. She'd meant to take 10 minutes. Just close her eyes and clear the blur. She'd been here long enough to know the nighttime sounds of the building, which elevator took longer, which AC vent rattled. She would hear him coming. She didn't hear him. She felt the weight of being watched. Petra opened her eyes. Donovan Holt was standing 8 feet from her desk. She didn't scream. She wanted to credit herself for that later, but the truth was her body simply locked, every muscle seizing in a moment of pure, speechless animal terror. He was still in his evening clothes, a charcoal jacket over a black shirt, but the jacket was wrong. The shoulder was torn. There was a dark stain along the inside of the sleeve that he hadn't bothered to hide. He wasn't hiding anything tonight. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, watching her with those flat, pale eyes, the color of river water in winter, and he didn't look surprised to find her there. He looked like a man calculating the cost of what he was seeing. Mr. Holt. Her voice was steadier than she deserved. She straightened in her chair, reached automatically for her mouse. I apologize. I was finishing the Q3 reconciliation. I found a discrepancy in the Belize account. Someone ran an unauthorized transfer through the Tampa pharmaceutical route. I know about Tampa. His voice was low, rougher than usual, like something had scraped it raw. She stopped. He walked closer, unhurried, and she made herself stay still. She'd learned that too, that flinching around Donovan Holt was an invitation to be studied. He stopped at the corner of her desk and looked at the laptop screen. Not at her, at the numbers. You found it, he said. About an hour ago. The routing is elegant. Whoever built it knew your architecture from the inside. She paused. That's why I stayed. Someone with internal access made that transfer. If the auditors pull thread on it, it unravels fast. I needed to get ahead of it. How long had you been asleep? The question landed like a small stone dropped into still water. Petra felt the heat move up her throat. I wasn't. Your laptop logged a 40-minute idle period. He tapped the corner of the screen without touching it. The motion sensors show no movement on this floor for 42 minutes before I arrived. She pressed her lips together. 20 minutes. 30 at most. I had the numbers memorized. I needed to clear the blur. She met his gaze. I found the leak. That matters more than whether I rested for half an hour. Something crossed his face. Not warmth. Holt didn't do warmth, but something adjacent. A recalibration. He reached into his jacket, pulled it off in one motion, and draped it across the back of her chair. She startled, twisting to look at it. The fine charcoal wool settling over the worn beige of her cardigan like a mistake that somehow looked intentional. The ventilation runs cold at night, he said, as if that explained it, as if he hadn't just done something human. He moved to the small credenza behind her desk, opened the lower cabinet, and pulled out a bottle. Bourbon, the good kind, the kind nobody drank because it was too valuable to drink. He poured 2 glasses, set one in front of her. "Drink," he said, not unkindly. "Then tell me about the transfer." She drank. It burned beautifully, and the trembling in her hands that she hadn't acknowledged until this moment slowed and steadied. She wrapped both palms round the glass and started from the beginning. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He stood with his own glass and his torn sleeve and his expression that gave away nothing, and he listened to every word. When she finished, the silence between them felt different than it had before, less like a void, and more like something held carefully, afraid to tip. "The person who built that routing," Holt said finally, "works for Guillermo Salazar. He runs the Gulf Ports operation. He's been trying to move into my supply chain for 18 months. He looked at her directly. Tonight escalated things." She looked at the stain on his sleeve. He didn't look away. "I handled my end," he said. "The question is whether Salazar knows what you found before I can close the gap." "He doesn't." She turned back to the laptop. "The transfer is buried 4 layers deep. I only found it because I run the reconciliation by hand, not automated. No algorithm would have flagged it for weeks." She hesitated. "But if he has someone inside who built this routing, they know the filing architecture. They'll know when the Q3 report goes in and what it will show." "What do you need to make it show nothing?" She looked at him. 6 hours and full access to the offshore ledgers. He held her gaze for a long moment. "You've been here 2 years and you've never asked for full access." "I've never needed it to protect you before." The words came out before she could stop them. She heard how they sounded, raw, unguarded, too much. She reached for her glass to cover it. Holt said, "Why do you stay, Petra?" She stilled. It was the first time he had ever used her first name. "You're too precise for what I pay you to do," he continued. "You could work for any firm in this city. The legal kind. You choose to sit in this building at 2 a.m. reconciling accounts that could get you arrested, and you do it better than anyone I've ever hired." He tilted his head slightly. "I'd like to know why." The bourbon was warm in her chest. The exhaustion was a weight across her shoulders like a second jacket. And Donovan Holt, who had never once asked her a personal question in 2 years, was watching her with those winter water eyes and something that looked dangerously close to wanting an actual answer. "My brother has lymphoma," she said. 3rd stage. He's 24. She kept her eyes on the glass. "The treatment protocol costs $11,000 a month. You pay me 6 figures. Nobody legal pays that for a bookkeeper." She finally looked up. "So I keep your ledgers clean, and I don't look at what's in the shipments. And Felix gets his medication, and that's the whole math of it." Holt was quiet for a moment that stretched too long. "I know about your brother," he said. The air in the room changed. "I run thorough backgrounds on everyone I employ," he added before she could speak. "I knew about the diagnosis before I hired you. I knew about the debt." He set his glass down on the credenza. "I hired you because you were drowning, and you still hadn't cut a corner in the work I gave you. People who are drowning and still won't cheat are worth considerably more than people who cheat when they're comfortable." She stared at him. "You hired me because I was desperate." "I hired you because you were desperate and honest. That combination is rarer than you think. She didn't know what to do with that. She looked at his jacket draped over her chair, the torn shoulder, the stain. "I'll get you the access," he said. "Get ahead of Salazar's routing before morning." He was halfway to his office when the freight elevator at the south end of the floor ground to life. Not the executive elevator, the freight lift, the one that hadn't been used since the building was retrofitted, the mechanical shriek of old cable under new weight. Holt stopped. His hand moved under his jacket. "Get under the desk," he said, quiet, absolute. Petra didn't argue. She slid out of her chair and under the desk in one movement, pulling the laptop dark with her. The darkness was immediate and total. She pressed her back against the modesty panel and held her breath. She heard them before she saw the light. 2, maybe 3 sets of footsteps, moving with the careful precision of people who knew the building's rhythm, counting the motion sensors, accounting for the blind spots. They knew the floor plan. Inside information. She heard Holt move, not toward her, away from her, drawing them toward the far side of the floor. She heard him say something low and cold in Spanish, and then a shot suppressed to a wet thud, and then a body hitting carpet, and then running footsteps, and then 2 more shots that weren't suppressed at all. The sound was enormous. She pressed both hands over her ears and clenched her teeth until the ringing replaced it. Then silence. Petra, his voice. She came out from under the desk. He was standing in the middle of the floor, and 2 men were not standing anywhere anymore. The window behind her desk had a neat hole in it, ringed with spiderweb fractures. The bourbon bottle was shattered. Glass and dark liquid spread across the credenza in a wide, ruinous fan. He crossed to her in 4 strides and grabbed her arm, not rough, not gentle, somewhere between the two that was practical and grounding. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Her voice had gone somewhere she couldn't find. "They came for the ledgers," he said. "Salazar wanted what you found, and he wanted it before I could move on it. They weren't supposed to find anyone here." She looked at the men on the floor. She looked at his torn sleeve, and at the new red spreading from a graze at his hairline that he hadn't mentioned. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's shallow." He was already moving, pulling out a phone. She followed him. "My brother, if they know about me, they know about." He stopped. She watched his face do something she'd never seen it do, a crack in the calculation, brief, real. "Felix is at Tulane Medical," she said. "3rd floor oncology. He's alone tonight because I stayed here to finish." Her voice did something she couldn't stop. She pressed her knuckles against her lips and breathed through her nose. Holt made 1 call, 40 seconds, 3 sentences. He put the phone away. "I have people at Tulane Medical," he said. "They've been there since your 3rd month." She went very still. "You're a vulnerability," he said, with his eyes somewhere past her left shoulder. "I secure my vulnerabilities." It was the most emotionless sentence she had ever heard delivered for what was clearly not an emotionless reason. "You put guards on my brother," she said. "I put guards on my exposure," he said, and it landed as what it was. A lie told by a man who didn't know how to tell the truth about something that had made him feel human. She looked at him for a long moment, at the blood drying at his temple, at the jacket that was still draped over the back of her chair across the ruined floor. She had worked for this man for 2 years and built her entire understanding of him on ledgers, the cold geometry of income and expenditure and carefully maintained distance. She had never let herself look past the numbers. She was looking now. "Tell me how to help you finish Salazar," she said. He looked at her. "You've done enough tonight. I found his routing. I know how he launders. Give me full access and I'll trace every dollar he's moved through your territory in the past year. I'll find his operating capital before he can move it." She held his gaze. "You have enforcers, Holt. You don't have anyone who can follow money faster than he can spend it. Let me do what you actually hired me for." He studied her face in the ruined office, with glass crunching under their feet and the smell of cordite hanging in the French Quarter air. And he made the kind of calculation that Petra had spent 2 years watching him make. Fast, complete, and without sentiment. Then he pulled a flash drive from the interior pocket of his jacket, the one still draped over her chair, and held it out. She took it. They worked through what remained of the night. Holt on the phone, moving pieces she couldn't see. Petra, at the laptop, moving through Salazar's financial infrastructure the way she moved through everything, methodically, without ego, following the logic of the money until it led her somewhere the money wasn't supposed to go. At 5:47 a.m. she said, "Found it." He was at her shoulder in seconds. She walked him through it, a series of legitimate-looking real estate development firms across Metairie and Kenner, inflating renovation contracts, washing cash through subcontractors, registered to addresses that didn't exist. $3 million staged, and ready to fund the next phase of Salazar's push into Holt's territory. "He's leveraged," she said. "If this capital disappears before it moves, he can't pay the crews he's already promised. He'll have a mutiny on his hands before he has a war." She looked up at him. "I can make it disappear." "Do it," Holt said. She didn't steal it. Stealing would leave a trace. She scattered it instead, routing the funds into microtransfers across 22 different charities, anonymous and untraceable, gone before any automated system would flag the movement. $3 million vaporized before the French Quarter had its first cup of coffee. She sat back. Holt was looking at her the way he'd been looking at her since he'd walked onto the floor, and found her asleep at her desk, like something he'd been trying to categorize and kept failing. "You know what you just did," he said. "I know what the numbers did," she said. "I just ran them in the right direction." He reached out slowly. His thumb brushed the edge of her jaw, and she realized there was a smear of ink there, from the pen she'd been holding all night, and he was wiping it away with a careful, improbable gentleness that had no business existing in the same hands that had just ended 2 men's lives. Petra. Her name in his voice still didn't sound like what she was used to. It sounded like something he was being careful with. "Don't," she said quietly. "Say it like it means something, or don't say it at all." He looked at her. The pale eyes weren't flat anymore. They were tired in the way of a man who had been performing a very convincing version of himself for a very long time, and had simply run out of energy to keep it up. "Stay," he said. "Not the building, not the job. The one syllable that meant the other thing." Through the windows, the sky over New Orleans was going the color of river water at dawn, pewter and brass and the very first warning of gold. Petra looked at the ruined credenza, the shattered bourbon, the laptop screen still glowing with columns of numbers that had quietly dismantled a man's empire while he slept. She thought about Felix waking up at Tulane Medical in 3 hours, not knowing how close the night had come to going differently. She thought about 2 years of keeping her eyes on the ledgers and her hands as clean as a person's hands could be when they worked in this building, for this man. She thought about the jacket draped over her chair, the first unrequested kindness anyone had shown her in longer than she could calculate. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, relief. "Name them." "Felix's treatment is paid in full, not month to month, fully funded in a trust I control that exists whether or not I work for you." She held his gaze. "My compensation reflects what I actually do, not what my job title says I do, and I want full access, not just in a crisis. Every ledger, every shell, every account. I can't protect what I can't see." "Done," Holt said. "All of it." "Those are the professional conditions," she said. He waited. "The personal ones," she said, "I haven't decided on yet." The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, not the way a smile looked on ordinary faces. But on Donovan Holt it was something she had never seen before, and it rearranged everything she thought she understood about the geometry of the room. He reached down and picked up his jacket from the back of her chair. He held it out to her. Not draped, not dropped, offered. She took it. They walked out of the ruined office together, through the glass doors and into the executive corridor. into the private elevator that descended without sound. The building hummed around them, that low, mechanical respiration she'd long since stopped noticing, and New Orleans opened below them like a city, just discovering it had survived another night. She had walked into this building 2 years ago as a woman with a sick brother, a debt she couldn't outrun, and a talent nobody important had noticed yet. She walked out of it this morning as something she didn't have a clean word for. In Donovan Holt's world, that probably meant she was finally exactly where she belonged.